Hello, everyone. This is Jara Metter. I'm the director of challenge.gov and citizenscience.gov at the General Services Administration. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 14th episode of the Federal Crowdsourcing and Webinar Series. I want to remind you that we are recording this episode, and please note that we'd like for you to introduce yourselves in the chat window, as we're seeing many of you do right now. Thank you for doing that. Also, throughout this presentation, we'll be pausing periodically so that the presenters can answer the questions. So again, we do ask that you put questions in the chat window as they come up, and we will get to them as we can. Today's episode is titled Putting Open Data to Work for America's Communities. This is an amazing collaboration between the Department of State and the Opportunity Project, where they came together to really try to reimagine and refresh civics education for a new generation. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Sarath of State Department and Anna of the Opportunity Project to continue with the introductions of their team and to kick off this episode. Over to you, Sarath.
Thanks so much, Shara, for that kind introduction. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this webinar today. We're really excited about the opportunity to talk more about this partnership, this collaboration between the Department of State's Office of Foreign Assistance and the Census Bureau's The Opportunity Project about ways to innovate civics education for American students. Now, before doing that, of course, we really want to know more about you and who this audience is comprised of. So do please drop more information about yourselves in the chat. For example, I suspect that a number of you are my mom's friends that have been forced onto this. And so with that in mind, if you just want to say your name, comma, Sarath's mom's friend, comma, Central Louisiana, that'd be great for me so that I can send you a thank you note that my mom will force me to write for all of you afterward. Next slide. Or actually, sorry, keep the slide. My name is Sarath Ganji, and I do communications for foreignassistance.gov. Foreignassistance.gov is the U.S. government's chief transparency portal for reporting foreign assistance data. That data spans 20 plus federal agencies and comes in a few flavors of data. And so, as you can imagine, is a huge and really a hardworking team that supports a mission and a vision like that. And so, I hope to name check more people as the presentation goes on, but in particular, I want to introduce two that have been instrumental to this partnership with the Opportunity Project. The first is Samantha Spilka, who you can see up top. Sam is the Department of State's liaison to federal agencies that are responsible for reporting foreign assistance data. And the second is Amin Vafa. And Amin is in charge of a number of different data analytics, transparency, and accountability work streams that exist within the Office of Foreign Assistance within the Department of State. So organizationally, I'll get into that a little bit more later. But suffice it to say that they've been tremendous in this partnership, as have a number of people on the census side. So let me turn it over to Anna.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarath. My name is Anna Valuev. I'm head of strategic initiatives for the Opportunity Project, which is an initiative of the Census Open Innovation Labs at the U.S. Census Bureau. We bring together technologists, government, and communities to rapidly prototype digital products, all powered by federal open data, and have been really lucky and excited to collaborate with FA.gov and with Sarath and his team this summer and fall. So we're really looking forward to telling you more about that. I'll just turn it over to my colleague Radhika to say hello, because she and our director Drew Zachary and our director of operations Lorena Molina Irizarry have been instrumental in putting together this collaboration.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Radhika Bhatt. I'm the Deputy Director of the Opportunity Project. Really excited to be here with everyone today, and just wanted to mention that this collaboration, has happened many times with the Opportunity Project and really strives to be across federal government. So I'm seeing a lot of different federal agencies writing your names in the chat. So thanks everyone for being here and excited to connect further.
Great.
And I think, yeah, we'll turn it back to Sarath to give a little intro to the agenda and to kick us off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Anna. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this conversation between you and us today is to discuss the role of civics education in our day-to-day lives and why the Department of State and the Census Bureau care about and are involved in this space. To do that, Anne and I plan on alternating discussing different elements of this presentation with the goal of modeling for all of you the co-creation process when it comes to problem definition. It's that process, that co-creation process that's so integral to human-centered design. It was so integral to the way we thought about innovating civics education for American students. And it's very much at the heart of the very top model that seeks to address real-world challenges. Next slide, please. So here's a question I think this community is pretty familiar with. How do you scale a promising idea from inception to action? Right? How do you scale a promising idea from inception to action? Now, in the private sector, that answer is somewhat straightforward. There is this ecosystem of institutions that are there to help grow promising ideas. And uniquely, those institutions are familiar with each other. They tend to talk to each other. And terms that you've probably heard within this space, incubators, accelerators, hybrid models, angel investors, these are terms that you're probably familiar with. Now, pose that same question about inception to action and promising ideas in the public sector, and the answer is a little harder to come by. The people closest to the work, federal employees, often have no obvious outlets for their ideas that are meant to improve existing processes in order to help agencies better realize their mandates and missions. It's not that those outlets don't exist, they do, but all too often we're not aware of them, or they're not aware of each other, or it's such an unfamiliar and novel environment, a very different culture, that we're wary and hesitant to really broach that world. So, next slide, please. With that in mind, I'd like to underscore that point by talking a bit about foreignassistance.gov, where I and Sam and Amin work. As I mentioned earlier, FA.gov is this open data transparency portal that reports foreign assistance data in particular, and it does so on behalf of 20+ federal agencies, all with the goal of enhancing data-driven decision-making. FA.gov, as we tend to call it, exists within the Office of Foreign Assistance of the Department of State. We call the Office of Foreign Assistance, like all of us who love acronyms, F. Foreign assistance, by definition, comprises U.S. funds that the U.S. government implements overseas through over 20 federal agencies and thousands of additional implementing partners in support of U.S. humanitarian, security, and commercial objectives. With that in mind, F, the Office of Foreign Assistance, its mission is to make that very assistance more strategic, more coordinated, and more effective. In a few months, FA.gov is really excited to be celebrating its 10th anniversary. Next slide. But as you can imagine, over that 10-year period, we've gone through a number of phases on our journey to becoming this open data transparency portal. And these are phases I think a number of you who work in the open data, open innovation, open gov space are probably pretty familiar with. The first phase started in 2005 when our mandates were first created. FA.gov was stood up that year in response to multiple international commitments that the United States made to improve the effectiveness of foreign assistance programs. Those mandates, they reflect the what of FA.gov, of our mission. The second phase began in 2010, and that's when our website actually launched as a repository for data. Our team of developers and analysts built FA.gov, built this website by establishing partnerships with federal agencies to collect their data, and then designing a process to validate and clean and ensure the quality of that very data. Partnership, process, those concepts reflect the how of the website. Finally, the third phase began in 2015. That's when FA.gov underwent a redesign. The purpose of that redesign was to introduce a more intuitive layout and more user-friendly tools, some of which I'll describe a little bit later. And broadly, the principle behind that redesign was to make the data that we were holding, the repository that we had, more accessible to the public. And so it's that mission of data transparency and its route to promoting greater accountability that reflects the why. So the mandates are the what, process and partnerships are the how, and transparency and accountability are the why. put all that together, and today we see ourselves, foreignassistance.gov, and our broader team as a data service provider on behalf of the broader Department of State and interagency footprint that deals with foreign assistance. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we have a pretty multifaceted and disciplinary team to help with that mission. So I mentioned earlier that we exist within the Office of Foreign Assistance F. Specifically, our team encompasses a few different work streams within the umbrella of what we call the Data Analytics, Transparency, and Accountability team. So broadly, we're known as FData, and our team comprises 20+ analysts, designers, developers, and communicators whose objective is to equip policymakers and the public with better data in order to prompt better questions and drive better decisions. And so there are 3 sets of services that we aim to offer with respect to that data-driven decision-making mission. The first, which we've already described, are external data services, and that comes in the form of FA.gov, which is what Sam and I in particular work on. FA.gov offers users a number of tools to make foreign assistance data more accessible. There's the Explore tool, which maps foreign assistance across time and space. There's the Analyze tool, which visualizes data about foreign assistance, but also from a number of third-party organizations for the purpose of making the visuals prompt greater insights from users using it. There's the Download tool, which allows users to customize and curate the data they're most interested in for their research and professional purposes. And then fourth, there's the Learn tool, which offers context on the data. What is foreign assistance? What is aid transparency? How does the federal budget process work? In addition to our external data services, the ways we use this foreign assistance data more broadly, there's also a set of internal data services. These are run by our Foreign Assistance Data Review team. And in particular, this FADR team supports customized dashboards that are meant to equip department leaders and analysts with tools to help inform better decision-making. And then finally, the third set of services we offer are rapid response services. These were services we stood up several months ago in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, it was a Tiger team that was meant to help locate and validate data requested by department and interagency leaders, all with the goal of helping showcase US global leadership as it concerned crisis response globally. Now, as you know, with respect to all these kinds of data services, really our day-to-day is spent in the weeds of that data. And by being in the weeds, it affords us a certain perspective with respect to that data. There are certain needs that we can see, certain ideas we have, certain solutions that we start to identify. But knowing where to turn to for guidance, either at the department or across the federal government, that's not an easy task. Where do we go for these ideas, for these needs, for these solutions? Next slide. And so in particular, our team, the FData team, day to day, based on our work with the data, tends to conjure a few questions that really reflect what the data does and how we see the data more broadly. One, how can federal agencies connect with customers to better understand their needs? Two, how can federal teams realize the spirit of their mandates, right? The spirit of their mandates while still implementing the letter of them. And then three, how can federal employees develop and scale their more entrepreneurial ideas? So these are the questions that are often on our minds, but I want to pause it right there and see what questions and comments are on your minds. Let's take a look at the chat, and happy to answer anything that folks would like to pose our way. And I'll also just flag that we'll be taking questions sort of throughout the presentation, but then also having to take questions at the very end if people prefer that. Thank you, Jeff. I'm sure my mom also saw your presentation for NASA months ago, so she's also proud of you. Awesome, I love compliments, but I'm also happy to turn it over to Anna right now, given that we have these questions in mind. Anna, can you talk more about what the top team might be able to offer with respect to these?
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking to, answering the question of how to turn data-related ideas into scalable solutions and how to bring together a diverse group of stakeholders to really collaborate on this type of innovation, we're going to talk a little bit about the Opportunity Project. Like I mentioned before, the Opportunity Project is an initiative of the Census Open Innovation Labs. It was launched almost 5 years ago with the mission of bringing together technologists, government, and communities to rapidly prototype digital products that solve real-world challenges using federal open data. We can go to the next slide, which describes the start of the TOP process. So the Opportunity Project process begins with a federal agency from across the government identifying a challenge where there really is a need for data-driven innovation. In the past, these challenges have included the STEM pipeline, healthcare-related challenges, workforce challenges, and environmental challenges. Over the years, the Opportunity Project has worked with over 25 federal agencies on over 30 challenges. So when Sarath is talking about, thinking about translating these big ideas or problems into scalable solutions, that's really what we work on, and federal agencies throughout the government really come up with these challenges, which then are the basis of the innovation that happens through the Opportunity Project. On the next slide, you'll see that tech teams who come from private industry, from big tech, from startups, from universities, from nonprofit organizations, they really run the gamut from the types of technologists that they are, but they make up tech teams in our process. So the Opportunity Project team engages with folks throughout the technology sector and brings on tech teams who tackle one of the challenges identified by the federal agencies over the course of a 12-week product development sprint. Typically, our sprints have a few different problem statements that all are aligned within a certain theme. So the disaster preparedness was a theme, or environmental challenges, and so we have problems from across different federal agencies, and tech teams choose a challenge to really focus on and develop a digital product over the course of the sprint that addresses that challenge that the federal agency put forward. On the next slide, you'll see that we assemble a coalition of experts to really support the tech teams in their progress. So these experts come from across government and communities, and they really offer their expertise to ensure that a diverse perspective and knowledge are really incorporated into the solution. We can move to the next slide, and this really outlines some of the different other perspectives in addition to technologists that are incorporated into the sprints. So we have federal experts, in addition to the policy folks who identified the challenge from the federal agency and then participate in the sprint to further contextualize the challenge and really act as a key resource to the tech teams. We also bring on federal data stewards who are really experts in the technical matter of the data sets that they represent. They participate from across government, again, to really help teams navigate federal open data, identify relevant data sets, and answer technical questions as they come up. We also bring on user advocates who are community leaders, NGOs, industry folks, and other subject matter experts, and they really represent potential end users of the tools. They give teams insight into the challenges that specific communities are facing on the ground to really make sure that we're incorporating human-centered design principles into our work and really creating solutions with potential end users as opposed to just for them. And then we also bring in product advisors who really help teams think about the longer-term sustainability strategy of the product that they are developing during the sprint. So typically these are folks from outside of government who are coming in to advise each of the tech teams. On the next slide, you can see that the milestone calls tend to structure the sprint over the course of the 12 or 14 weeks. During these milestone calls, all of the sprint collaborators, so the tech teams, the user advocates, the agency leads, the data stewards, come on the line and are really collaborating during these interactive calls. So in the first few weeks of the sprint, the tech teams conduct user research with the user advocates and the agency leads to really understand the challenges on the ground as they relate to each problem statement. And then they all come together during the user research milestone where tech teams share insights they've learned through user research and their plans for additional conversations. And then they get feedback from all of the other collaborators who might connect them with additional folks to get new perspectives. They might suggest what particularly resonated or what maybe resonated less. And that's how the milestones typically work. So then the next part of the sprint is data exploration. So tech teams explore the initial data sets that the agency put forward, and then they join the data exploration milestone where the federal data stewards from a variety of agencies share about available data, they answer questions, and tech teams talk a little bit about what data they plan to incorporate. Over the course of the sprint, there's then a series of demos from a concept pitch to a beta demo to an MVP demo where tech teams are really sharing their progress and getting feedback from the other collaborators. And then in December, we hold a demo day each year, which is an open press event, and it's a really great opportunity for collaborators to come together and showcase and launch their products. Typically, demo day is an in-person event. This year it will be virtual, but it really is a great way to conclude the sprint and really have everyone launch their products publicly. On the next slide, we have just a snapshot of some of the tech teams that have participated in the Opportunity Project over the years. As I mentioned before, we've seen tech teams come from big tech companies like Google and Microsoft, from universities like Columbia and George Mason, and some from the University of California system, from startups and nonprofits with technical expertise, and everyone in between. So we really bring together a diverse group of technologists who create a really diverse set of solutions to some of these really challenging problems. And if we move to the next slide, over the course of our 5 years of the Opportunity Project, we've catalyzed the development of over 100 digital products. And these really range from apps to maps to websites to video games and dashboards and different data visualizations. And so we really rely on the technical expertise of the tech teams to determine what the best technology is to utilize in this particular challenge area, with an emphasis on having those conversations with community leaders and really understanding the needs on the ground. And so both of those things really inform what kind of products come out of the sprint. So I'm going to pause there and just see if anyone has any questions on the Opportunity Project and how it broadly speaking works. And please feel free to put the question in the chat.
Anna, I'm going to go ahead and pose a question to you because I know that this is something that Sarath and I thought a lot about when we first learned about the Topx project, and we're so excited about it. But if you could maybe expand a little bit more about some of the benefits that a federal agency like us would have in participating in a sprint like this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Sam. One of the main things that we see quite a lot and that we talked with all of you about a lot was really the opportunity for agencies to engage with data consumers and get feedback on the data that is publicly available to really improve data quality. And we hear a lot from agencies that feedback loop isn't always as easy. And with the Opportunity Project, we bring together those federal data stewards who are often really the main points of contact for a particular data set or set of data sets, and they're hearing directly on calls and via email and Slack from folks in the sprint who are using their data. So that's one of the key pieces. I would say also just the kind of broader reuse of federal open data. There are a lot of goals among a variety of federal agencies, including the CAP goals, the Federal Data Strategy, and the Evidence Act that really require agencies to collaborate with industry and to increase the reuse and dissemination of federal open data. And so the Opportunity Project is really a great opportunity for agencies to do just that and really increase the use of this data into tools that are solving challenges on the ground. And then just a few other kind of benefits come to mind, which are catalyzing solutions that are just in greater volume and diversity and quantity and quality than what an agency on its own might be able to do. And, you know, that slide with the variety of different products just goes to show that technologists are really able to adapt the types of solutions that they're developing through the sprint to the specific needs that they hear about from the user advocates and from the agency leads. And lastly, I would say it's a really lightweight process to participate. It really, we really try to hone in on the key kind of focus areas of each week. It's a process that we've honed in on over the course of 5 years. And so it's a really great way for folks to collaborate with cross-sector participants, but really in a way that, that isn't, you know, particularly burdensome. Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, and we will open it up for a Q&A once you all see how all of these topics come together. But I'm going to turn it back over to Sarath to talk about a specific challenge that FA.gov identified and really the impetus of the collaboration between our team at the Opportunity Project and Sam and Sarath and Amin and their team at the State Department.
Great, thank you for that, Anna. So our team, the FData team, first learned about the top model back in February, and it really scratched an itch that had been bothering us for some time now, this idea of public trust. Next slide, please. The figure on the left comes from the Pew Research Center from last year, and it looks at survey data going back to the 1950s. And you can see that over the past 20 years in particular, the last 2 decades, there's this decline in the American public's trust in the federal government. Now, I want you to keep that data in your mind, declining trust in the federal government over the past 2 decades. A month after we learned about the top model, COVID-19 prompted everyone on my team to have to begin to work from home, and I suspect that was probably similar for a lot of you. And I had several colleagues who were trying to balance working from home with caretaking responsibilities, right? Their kids weren't in school anymore. It was clear then that more of the nation's learning would be moving online. It would have to. And if you look at the figure on the right, this is a report with some good bullet points about upcoming trends from the World Economic Forum. So, online learning and public trust. Trust in the US government, trust in federal institutions, trust in American democracy. This is how the challenge of innovating civics education using digital tools first came to us. But we're a transparency portal, right? We deal with foreign assistance data. What do we have to do at all with civics education for kids? There are 2 ways in which we enter that conversation. Next slide, please. The first way is what we call Civics 301. Checks and balances, federalism, branches of government. These are all concepts that you've learned probably in a high school, maybe even a civics college class. But it's not enough to know just those concepts for a lot of folks in government who have to deal with higher order civics concepts like the federal budget. Unfortunately, there just isn't quite enough of a foundation when it comes to these very core civics concepts that are above and beyond what we might think of as Civics 101. There needs to be a broader base of understanding, and it needs to start earlier in order to form the kind of work that we all do in the federal government with respect to the institutions, the concepts, and the norms that undergird and underscore all of that. The second way we enter this conversation is something that, on an intuitive level, I think all of us recognize. A lack of knowledge about how federal institutions work contributes to the public's worsening view of democracy. It's hard to trust what you don't understand, and historically, Cold War era laws and policies encourage the Department of State to share its story of diplomacy and development with audiences overseas, but not necessarily the ones here at home. Predictably, here at home, our team often encounters these misconceptions about foreign assistance, the most prominent of which is that over a quarter, maybe even a third of the federal budget goes overseas on spending to foreign countries, when in fact that figure is less than 1% of the federal budget. And yet it's these very misconceptions that make it harder for us to do our core job of trying to improve foreign assistance, to make it more strategic, more coordinated, more effective, if the very assumptions on which these institutions are based are ones that aren't taken for granted. They're ones that we have to reopen and re-invite conversations about. And while that certainly affects us, I suspect it's that very lack of knowledge or understanding about institutions that impacts all of your missions as well, your ability to meet your mandates. And so fundamentally, reaching out to and educating kids is an understated but integral part of what we have to do in the government in order to meet our mission and meet our mandates. In addition to that, and this broader foreign assistance world that's tied into civics, there are two more specific ways that our team, the foreignassistance.gov team, plugs and plays into this world. The first is that we have a number of customers, specifically industry, advocacy, the interagency across the federal government, but then the media and academia that all use our services. And yet when it comes to a number of those groups, and in particular academia, we don't really understand or know who those users are. In our DCs, maybe it's a civics class, maybe it's a history class, maybe it's a speech and debate tournament, but we just don't know. And so it's a lot harder for us to really cater our open data in a way that targets the open innovation needs of groups like that. On top of that, our data set, compared to a lot of other federal data sets, models a number of American institutions and concepts that are pretty unique. And so I mentioned earlier that in particular, we have data, foreign assistance data that spans 20 plus federal agencies, and that data comes in three flavors. It comes in budgetary data, so these are funds that are requested by the president and then appropriated by Congress. There's financial data. These are funds that are obligated and then spent by federal agencies on the purchase of goods and services that are implemented overseas. And then there's performance data for two particular agencies, the Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development, which go over performance indicators that these agencies have set for themselves and measure their results with respect to these indicators based on particular targets. And so across these kinds of data types, these flavors, you can see different interactions between the executive branch and the legislative branch, between the federal government up top and then implementing partners on the ground, between the adaptive learning process on the back end versus the front end of the budgetary cycle. And so we think that our data in particular offers a unique view into how to practice and think about and pedagogically educate the public and kids in particular on civics concepts. Now, given the sort of challenges that we're talking about here, innovating civics education, and given the urgency of the moment that online learning is happening now, kids are not necessarily in school, and there's a need for more digital tools that allow kids to plug into the civic space. There's clearly an urgency to act. Next slide, please. And so with that in mind, Anna, top team, I'm curious if you could tell us more about how we square the urgency of now with the top model.
Absolutely. What I'm going to do is actually just move to the top toolkit and then open it up for questions. We've received two really great questions about the Opportunity Project model, but I want to just keep the flow of this example that Sarath just mentioned. So when the top team learned about the challenge that Sarath just described with, about trust in government and civics education, we were really excited to work with the FData.gov team on this challenge because it was so unique, so timely, so interesting. And there was an interest in launching this sprint in the fall. And because this topic was so unique, it didn't necessarily fit with an existing theme that the facilitated top sprints were focused on this year, which was the natural and built environment. And so as a result, this challenge was the perfect use case for the Topx Toolkit. We can go to the next slide. Over the years, we had heard from federal agencies that they wanted to participate in TOP, but they were looking for a timeline that best aligned with their work. So for instance, an agency that works on disaster response can't facilitate a sprint during hurricane season. And so they need a different timeline than the one that the Opportunity Project typically facilitates. And so we created Topx, which is an adaptable toolkit that enables federal agencies to leverage the TOP model and facilitate their own virtual technology development sprints that solve mission critical challenges on their own timelines. This toolkit is currently in beta and will be launched publicly in December, but we've been working with the state FA.gov team to develop or to kind of facilitate a sprint that is specifically focused on the challenge that Sarath just described above, but on a timeline that works really well in the fall so that they can incorporate teams from universities. And that's a smaller cohort really just focused around civic engagement and civics education. Next slide, please. This is what the toolkit looks like. It offers a step-by-step breakdown of the TOP process. It's easy to navigate either virtually or the entire toolkit can be downloaded as a PDF document. Next slide. Each of the 3 phases of the Topx process to facilitating a sprint is broken into steps, each of which includes a description and easy to follow instructions, effort level, key actions and tips, and downloadable resources. So we offer downloads that agencies can make to develop a problem statement. There's a template emails to do outreach, and facilitation guides to actually run the milestone calls. So we really enable federal agencies to take our model, but to modify it and adapt it in a way that makes the most sense for them. And that's what we've been working with Sarath and Sam and their team on at FA.gov. Next slide, please. So like I said, the Topx toolkit really breaks up the sprint facilitation process into 3 steps. So the first one is PreSprint Planning, which is a month or so of defining the problem statement and forming a team within your agency, and then recruiting cross-sector collaborators and preparing for the sprint. And we really support agencies in doing that with modifiable documents and templates that they can use to really do all of that pre-sprint planning. On the next slide, you'll see that the phase 2 of the sprint facilitation is actually facilitating those milestone calls. So once the team has finished their pre-sprint planning, it's time to really engage with those cross-sector collaborators that they recruited and facilitate the sprint. So the toolkit walks agencies through facilitating a kickoff call and then user research, data, and demo milestones. We provide descriptions of what to cover in each call, what participants should be working on during each phase, as well as resources to share. Next slide, please. Once the sprint ends, we suggest that agencies host an event, either in person or virtually, to really celebrate the conclusion of the sprint and the work that has been done. So we offer information on suggestions for how to structure that event and some best practices that we've learned over the years. And then the toolkits offer suggestions for continuing to engage participants after the sprint, to track metrics, and really make sure that the tools are having the impact that they should be, and that is the goal in real communities. And so now on the next slide, we give a little bit of an overview on the sprint that we've been working on with the FA.gov team. So they've utilized our toolkit to launch a sprint just about 2 weeks ago that seeks to answer the question, how can we innovate civics education in K-12 schools to equip students with an understanding of how American institutions work? And so they really challenge participants to utilize some of the fantastic open foreign assistance data that they provide to help students really understand how the budget process works and how different institutions work with the example of foreign assistance. And so we were able to recruit 4 tech teams. So we have a private sector team from Bytes Media, which creates really easy to read and understand content for students in social studies and in civics, as well as 3 incredible university teams who really come from cross-disciplinary backgrounds. So we have a team from Carnegie Mellon's Policy Innovation Lab, a team from Suffolk University that's partnered with a data visualization organization in Boston, and then Syracuse University's iConsults Collaborative, which brought together students from their education school as well as their School of Information Technology to form a tech team. And so those 4 tech teams are collaborating with user advocates who represent a variety of perspectives in the education space and in the civic engagement space. And so we have groups of students from high school participating from an organization called LexGen. We have parent participants. We have a variety of teachers from civics to history to even computer science teachers. And then we have a variety of organizations that work every day in civics education and really provide the teams with an understanding of best practices and kind of lessons learned and what works well and what hasn't worked well in the past. And so all of these folks are collaborating as we speak. We just had the user research milestone yesterday that Sam and Saras led, where we heard from all of the tech teams on their conversations and user research with the user advocates, which was very impressive and really exciting. So that's just an example of the work that we are doing with the State Department FData.gov to really utilize this toolkit, but are really excited to publicly launch the product in December and to have more agencies sign on to facilitate their own sprints, again, at really modifiable timelines to address challenges that are mission critical, but that maybe don't necessarily align with a theme that the Opportunity Project is focusing on this year. So with that, I think we will open it up for questions. I would like to address a few of the questions that were posed in the chat earlier on. So I know that Jeff asked a question around kind of success stories and the process for identifying and ranking challenges. And I'll actually ask that Radhika and Lorena take that question. I think that, that your perspective will be really great there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. I can add some context to that, and Lorena, happy to hear from you as well. In terms of the process for identifying and ranking challenges, the way that the Opportunity Project has worked in the past is that we normally have themed cohorts. So last year we worked on the workforce. We had a workforce cohort, so that was really just a broad theme. But then when we kind of opened that up and asked agencies to submit, we got a lot of different problem statements that looked at things like entrepreneurship, or finding different paths to career success, even education and things like that. And so we kind of choose the theme, but we kind of rely on all the different federal agencies to submit their different challenges. And that's kind of how we go about finding these different challenges. And one thing that's really great about the Topx Toolkit is that we don't actually have to have a theme. It can really be up to you all to decide what is something that you want to explore, what's a challenge that you're facing or that's high priority for you all. And you can even take the Topx sprint and kind of run this entire process on your own. And we're just here to help with that. One thing that I think in terms of standout stories, in the past, we ran an entire geospatial cohort, which utilized geospatial data from a variety of federal agencies. But one group that we worked with was a team at FEMA. And a problem statement that they submitted looked at, the challenge of young people and people in general are not prepared when a natural disaster strikes. And while FEMA puts a lot of information on their website about, what are you supposed to do during a flood or a hurricane? What actions are you supposed to take? Oftentimes, people aren't going to the FEMA website to try to find this information. Sadly, it's not the most popular site out there. And so FEMA brought that challenge to us to think about, how do we remedy that? How do we make sure that people get the information that they need and are prepared when a natural disaster strikes? And so we had a variety of teams that took a lot of different approaches to creating a solution to that. One team actually created a game that put the user in the driver's seat and they had to navigate how to get out of a flood situation. But one thing that kind of stands out with that problem statement is that we had a team called Ovela, and they're part of an Estonian-American company, and they utilize European satellite data as well as census block data to create a visualization tool that allowed communities to actually visualize where there's structural risk when a natural disaster like an earthquake or a flood, if that was going to strike, they could actually identify where were areas that needed to be evacuated first, or areas that needed first responders to attend to first. And that product actually was, FEMA saw that and was really excited about it. And so FEMA and Novella have been able to kind of continue a partnership after the sprint. And they're actually piloting that product, I believe, in New York City and possibly in Miami as well. And so that's kind of something that has been able to come out of the Opportune Project that's been really interesting to observe and be a part of as well. Lorena, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Lorena Molina Irizarry, Director of Operations with the Census Open Innovation Labs. And I've been, engaging not only industry stakeholders, but federal agencies in this process for about 4 years. And they're just such a wealth of really great examples that we could point to. And I'm happy to drop the link in the chat so you can take a look at all of the products and different problem statements that have been addressed throughout the sprint process. But the one example that also comes to mind, and FEMA is a great one, was a problem statement around helping tribal, state, and local governments with local address data collection. And one of the participants was a tech team from Puerto Rico. And this was just for context after Hurricane Maria hit. And they participated in collaboration with the two sponsoring agencies, which was the Department of Transportation and the Census Bureau. And what they developed is a Puerto Rico address database that supports all 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico. And just for context, the municipalities are akin to what we would consider counties here in the States. And they're all legally independent municipio, and that means that there's no centralized database for addresses in Puerto Rico, and most municipios don't have a database that actually follows federal standards. There are a ton of inconsistencies between federal, state, and local data set, et cetera. So that makes that much more complicated in response, in a situation where they have to respond to effectively manage catastrophic events. So that's another great example. What they put together was a civic address governance platform where they actually engage all the municipalities, engage government and the private sector in Puerto Rico in collaboration with federal agencies to actually develop a process and standardize technology by which they could standardize the address databases. And that example is actually on our website as well. I'm going to drop it on the chat. And then as far as the question regarding recruitment and engagement process, I think there was another question around communication methods, actually from Laura, and the different channels. So we try to use different technologies just to address that question first. That specifically offers up the opportunity for people within federal government agency that might not have access to technologies like Slack or Zoom or others. So we use email, Zoom, Slack, and others so that we can get people working together in the best way possible. But granted, throughout our sprints, we usually have from 100 to 200 people in each sprint. And like Radhika said, they're cohort based. So the themes are, we developed the theme cohort process just to make sure that when we're recruiting technologists and we're recruiting experts in these subject matter areas, data experts, as well as the user advocates themselves, which represent the communities that are experiencing these challenges and these problems, that can actually tell a first person story and are representatives of the users themselves, that they're all kind of in this together and that the conversations align to each other as best as possible. And then the last question was around describing the process for recruitment and engagement. It's a pretty, we have built over the last 4 or 5 years a really strong network of collaborators from industry, academia, across the federal space, and as well as local state government. And we have over 2,500 people in this network that either are alumni or know people in these problem spaces. So it's a collaboration between us in the top team as well as the federal agencies to reach out to different partner networks, do a lot of user research ourselves, and who are the key players in these areas. So we're talking about recycling or reducing plastic waste pollution in oceans, for example, or how transportation emissions impact air quality, we definitely work with all the participants and the sponsoring agency to identify who are the key players in these problem spaces across the country and even internationally that would help serve a good voice in terms of a balance of subject matter expertise, interest in the problem statement, and engaging the right people that wish to work to solve those problems.
Yeah, and one thing I'll briefly add to that as well is the beautiful thing I think is that we can never tackle these challenges alone. And so when agencies come forward with these challenges, we can just do a quick Google search and see who else is working on this, who else is out there, who's already tackling this. Maybe there's existing technology. So a lot of it is thinking through that as well of if there's this challenge, who's already working on it? Is it a university? Is it a company? Is it a startup? The type of organization doesn't really matter. There's always a way for them to get involved. And so I think that's always been exciting for me personally is when we get a new topic, you get to dive into seeing who's out there and who's already doing work. And you can figure out a way to engage with them and bring them into this process because more often than not, they're also always looking for partners and looking for more ways to grow their product or get more users or just, make a broader impact. So we always find that people are excited to work with government and oftentimes through the Opportune Project have never worked with government before. So it just is a really great way to open new doors and make more connections and not only further open data, but just, bridge the gap between government and industry in general.
And I would say that with the Topx Toolkit, we really tried to work collaboratively with the agency to identify the right participants. So we were able to tap into our very large network that Lorena mentioned, but then we also were able to provide the State Department team with template emails to send out and really ways to engage with collaborators that they may not have worked with before. And so the toolkit really does outline those steps, but then we're also, available for broader kind of conversations on how to do that and are able to tap into this fantastic network of folks who we've worked with in the past or who have, expressed interest in working with us. So it's really a collaboration.
And we have a question from another participant. It's asking how we engage with non-connected and non-tech savvy users, as well as those that may reside in digital deserts. And that's a really great question. It is actually something that we spoke about yesterday during our user research call when we were talking about creating digital products for students, that students sometimes don't have access to technology and how are we going to be able to reach them. So I will hand it over to you, Anna and Radhika, but really pertinent question. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to help answer that. So we have had a rural focus or a rural element in almost all of the different cohorts that we've run because that's such a big pressing challenge. And we also recognize that technology isn't always the answer, or putting a new app in front of someone isn't going to solve every single challenge. And so I'd say we have definitely engaged with non-connected or maybe non-tech savvy users. And for those that live in digital deserts or where broadband access may be an issue or the digital divide is really present, we really try to make sure that we're bringing in the experts that are living in those areas or work with those communities, because they are oftentimes the ones that can answer those questions of how do we reach these people? How do we make sure that we're building with them in mind and building technology that they can access? And so I would say a big part of that is bringing those people into the mix as well and making sure that they have a seat at the table to say, this is what our communities need and this is what is and isn't working with existing technologies.
And Anna, I wanted to actually take the conversation back to when you guys were talking about the products that are developed, because this is something that Sarath and I and the Topx team talked a lot about, is the sustainability of these projects that are created by the tech teams and how they are maintained. Obviously, we are using government open data for them to solve problems, but how do they live on? And I know this is a very big question when we're doing recruiting, so it'd be great to expand a little bit on that piece too.
Yeah, absolutely. And post-sprint sustainability is definitely a question that we think about a lot as well. Often teams are really focused in the 10 or 12 or 14 weeks in really developing something, but we really try to push them to think about, what's going to happen to the product after the sprint and how is it going to get into the hands of end users and really make an impact. So I would say that one thing is that we do bring on those product advisors whose role is to really help teams think about that. But we've also just seen kind of a variety of different ways that tends to work. So one of them is often that technology companies who participate have an existing product and that they're adding features or new data to it, or are adding a sub product to something that already exists, and they own the product after the sprint, and so they're able to really tap into an existing network of users or customers to make sure that this product is really getting into the hands of end users. Another thing I would say is that with those user advocates and having them involved and really as co-collaborators throughout the process, is that user advocates are really able to give their feedback on what kind of product will be most useful to the types of communities that they represent. And as a result, the products that come out of the sprint already have a group of folks who have buy-in and who have expressed that this is an interest to them because they've had a seat at the table the whole time. And so we've also seen that tech teams then end up collaborating with NGOs and others who are the user advocates to make sure that the product gets into the hands of the right people. And so it's really kind of those two methods. And then some teams also choose to make their product entirely open and available. And we really try to encourage that as well. And then through the user advocates and others, we try to identify the best end users to really, publicize this product to and make sure that the tech teams are connected with community leaders who are really tapped into these networks of potential end users. Yeah, and we did have a question in the chat about what the best ways that we found for soliciting feedback or getting feedback on data specifically. And I would say Radhika answered it in the chat, but really the data stewards connect with users through Slack and through the calls, which are really interactive. And the tech teams also have access to the data stewards' emails and really connect with them offline as well. And so all of the above is really the answer to that question as well. Great. And then the last thing that I just wanted to add on the Topx Toolkit was that it'll be, publicly launched in December, but we really encourage agencies for whom this might be an interest to please reach out to the Opportunity Project team, and I'll put that email in the Slack channel or in the chat here, but really to reach out in advance of that, because we'd love to discuss how we might be able to collaborate to stand up a sprint that really works well for your agency and fulfills a challenge that's really mission critical for all of you.
All right, and with that, we are at time. Thanks you all for such an amazing, deep conversation about your collaboration. It's really inspiring to all of us who really care about the value of making data open and innovation through collaboration. We will be posting the link to the recording of this webinar via the challenges listserv in the next week or so. And so thanks again for everyone who stayed on and for the great discussion. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.